How to Stay Invisible, Chapter 9. When Raymond started reading The Outsiders that night, he really liked it. He liked that the boys in the book were on their own like he was. It made him feel a little less alone. He read the book by the light of fire until he lost track of time. Miss Marcus had only asked them to read the first 2 chapters, but Raymond was halfway through it before he went to sleep that night. At breakfast the next morning, Harlon asked Raymond to go to the school's basketball game with him that afternoon. River Mill was the only middle school in the county, so when they had a game, it meant that a neighboring town was bussing in a team, which didn't happen that often. The entire school was buzzing with excitement. Raymond had gotten to school early that morning and had studied the floors looking for change for the winter jamboree, and all he had come up with was 35 cents. "I need to find $4 for the bingo entry," Raymond told Harlon. Raymond knew Harlon wouldn't ask him why he didn't ask his parents for the money. Harlon was a talker, but he hardly ever asked questions about Raymond's home life. "Last year, I found a dollar bill under the bleachers after a game," Harlon said. "I always help Mr. Engel with the cleanup after the games because my gran can't pick me up till after her shift. Maybe you can find some change down there." With the bingo game looming closer, Raymond figured it was worth a shot. Almost every student at River Mill had gathered in the school's gymnasium for the game after school. Raymond and Harlon found empty seats in the bleachers and sat down to wait. Harlon was grinning from ear to ear and could hardly contain his excitement. To Raymond's horror, Joseph Banker and his cronies sat down in front of them. "Well, well," Joseph said, sizing up Raymond and Harlon. You two look like you came right out of the dumpsters." Raymond was instantly aware of the dirt stains on his hoodie. "Find any good trash lately?" Jeremy Wallace, Joseph's constant companion, asked. "By the looks of your clothes, I'd say Christmas couldn't get here soon enough." Jeremy wasn't that smart, but he was always well dressed. "Good one," Raymond muttered. "Don't," Harlon whispered. "They ain't worth it." But Harlon's ears had turned a bright shade of red, and he hunched over, trying to conceal the holes in his tattered blue jeans. "I bet Christmas don't come at all by the looks of these two," said Joseph. "Your mom don't get around to shopping much from jail, does she?" He shoved Harlon's boot. Raymond looked at his friend. Harlon hadn't mentioned anything about his mother being in jail. Harlon winced, obviously upset. He was staring at Joseph now. His smile had disappeared and his eyes blazed. "Poor Harley," Joseph continued, using the voice that old lady used when they talked to babies. "Mommy gone off to prison and Dad don't care enough to stick around." Harlon's hands were shaking. "Shut up, Joseph," he said through gritted teeth. "What's the matter, Harley?" Joseph asked, turning to face him. "Did you think nobody knew? My dad works for the police department, and he told me that your mom ain't getting out for a long time. Robbed a convenience store. She probably don't even care. At least she gets to be away from you. Worth shooting up." But Joseph never got a chance to finish his sentence. Harlon jumped up and punched him right in the eye with a resounding pop. Joseph fell from the bleachers and scrambled to get up. Harlon was on top of him in a second, and then Mr. Brewer was there grabbing Harlon by his shirt collar, dragging him off Joseph. Raymond jumped up to protest. "Joseph was talking about Harlon's mom," Raymond yelled, but Mr. Brewer didn't wait to hear the whole story. "You," he said, pointing at Raymond, "and you." He pointed at Joseph, who was cupping his face and whimpering. "He just hit me for no reason," Joseph whined. I didn't say anything to him. Ask anyone. Joseph's friends were nodding but silent. The whole gymnasium had quieted down, eagerly watching the scene. That's not true! Raymond yelled, furious at the indignity. Harlon looked crestfallen. He was limp, like he had turned to jelly in Mr. Brewer's grip. He stared at the gym floor as silent tears fell from his face. It was the longest time Harlon had gone without talking in all the time that Raymond had known him. Mr. Brewer kept a firm grip on Harlan's shirt collar as he dragged him from the gymnasium toward the front office. Raymond and Joseph walked silently behind them. Raymond was fuming. Joseph was moaning and whimpering over his eye, which had already begun to turn purple. When they reached the office, Mr. Brewer dropped Harlon in a chair outside the principal's office and shoved the other two boys inside. He explained what he had seen to Mrs. Harding, the school principal, while Raymond listened, furious. Since this was the boys' first offense, Mrs. Harding went easy on them and only suspended Harlon from school for the rest of the week. She banned all three of the boys from attending any River Mill athletics events for the rest of the season. Raymond and Joseph sat in silence across her desk, staring at the floor. I'm very disappointed in you, she told Raymond. Miss Marcus says you are one of her brightest students. Bright students don't get wrapped up in fights. It wasn't fair. Joseph was the one who deserved to be punished, not Harlon. Harlon was defending himself, Raymond said angrily. Joseph was the one egging him on, talking about his mother. He felt like it was his duty as Harlan's friend to set the story straight. He knew Harlon would do the same for him. He braved a glance at Miss Harding. Miss Harding was a formidable woman. She wore her hair in a tight bun and held her shoulders back with her arms crossed in front of her. Raymond saw her hard face falter for a moment. Harlon has had a rough go, she said, but that doesn't excuse his behavior. Her tone was calmer now. You can't go around punching someone, even if it is well-deserved. She eyed Joseph. I'll have to call your parents, Mrs. Harding said, and Raymond's heart dropped to the floor. Before he could protest, Mrs. Harding added, You can go, Raymond. So you aren't calling my parents? Raymond asked. No, said Mrs. Harding, taking a long look at him. You weren't the one fighting, Raymond, but I never want to hear about you even stepping 1 foot out of line again, or I will. Yes, ma'am, Raymond said, jumping up. He couldn't get out of the office fast enough. He left Joseph sitting there as Mrs. Harding picked up the phone. Harlon was on a bench just outside of Mrs. Harding's office. Hey, Raymond said. Hey, said Harlon, without looking up. He sat staring at his hands. He looked like someone had told him NASCAR was canceled for the year. You aren't in trouble, are you? He asked, looking up at Raymond. Raymond lowered his voice. Nah, only a telling off. It was worth it, though, to see the look on Joseph's face when you slugged him. Harlon tried to smile, but his face fell. My Gran's gonna be so mad. She'll understand, Raymond said. Harlon shook his head. Raymond didn't want to leave him there alone, but he didn't want to hang around for Mrs. Harding to change her mind about calling his parents. I'd better get going. The rest of the week will fly by, Harlon, and you'll be back to school before you know it. Yeah. See you, Ray. Harlon met Raymond's eyes for a moment and then looked away again, staring back at his bruised hand. Raymond felt helpless. He wished that he could have done more to help. Harlon didn't deserve any of this. It was Joseph who should be suspended, not Harlon. Back in the woods, Raymond's emotions finally got the better of him. He kicked leaves and scattered his stick pile. He kicked the side of the wide tree trunk that was his home, pretending it was Joseph's face. "Ow!" he hollered, jumping up and down on one foot, clutching the toe of his shoe. He collapsed into a pile of brush. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. His parents leaving. Living in a tree. Harlan's mom in jail. Angry tears poured down Raymond's face. Rosie crept over and nestled her head under his arm. A few minutes passed before Raymond got up and started picking up the sticks that he had scattered. He threw them back angrily into a pile. "No fire tonight," he snapped at Rosie. "There's a basketball game. Someone might see." He chunked one of the sticks into the pile in the woods, pulled his hoodie over his mouth, and screamed into it. It was another cold night. Raymond layered on all the clothes he owned and wrapped an arm around Rosie in the hollow of the tree. He felt bad for yelling at her. He was exhausted, but wide awake at the same time. He tried to occupy his mind with other ways that he could come up with the money to play bingo, but all he could think of was Joseph Banker. Joseph's mother was probably doctoring his black eye at that very moment while Joseph moaned that it wasn't fair. Raymond gritted his teeth and held Rosie tighter. That night, he dreamed that he was the one with all the friends and that his own mother had marched up to the school and demanded to know what had happened to her son. She made him spaghetti for dinner and held frozen peas on his black eye while they watched TV together. Then he had gone to sleep in a king-size bed with the biggest, fluffiest comforter wrapped around him. Raymond woke up to the cold tree hollow. With the dream fresh in his mind, he swore under his breath. Rosie flinched. He dragged himself up and wiped the dust from his gray hoodie. He changed his clothes and stomped toward the school without so much as a backward glance at his dog. He ate breakfast alone, wrapping his leftover biscuit in a napkin. He felt a pang of regret for how he left Rosie. None of this was her fault. Now, on top of being frozen and angry, he had to feel guilty too. He threw the styrofoam tray in the trash with force and shoved his hands in his pockets. He made his way through the cafeteria and pushed through the door. He wasn't paying attention as he walked, and he slammed into someone. Books scattered to the floor. "Watch where you're going," he snapped. "Sorry, Raymond," a hurt voice said. It was Lexi, the redhead from a science class. "Oh, sorry, Lexi," Raymond said, his tone changing from annoyance to apology. "I didn't see you." "Are you okay?" Lexi looked from Raymond to the books strewn across the floor. Yeah, he stammered, backing away from her. "Really sorry." He turned and continued down the hall, leaving Lexi to gather her spilled books alone. At his cubby, Raymond shook his head in frustration and gathered his things for math. Harlon was suspended. He had snapped at Rosie, and now he had managed to bump into the only other person who had been nice to him at River Mill. He admonished himself for not helping her pick up her things. Couldn't he get anything right? Students were shuffling into the classroom, grabbing their books and chatting excitedly. He heard a few whispers about the fight, but mostly they were talking about the basketball game. "Raymond," Miss Marcus called, "come here, please." Raymond walked over to his teacher. She was sitting at her desk, clicking away at the keys on her computer. She looked up as he approached, a concerned expression on her face. "Are you all right, Raymond? I heard about what happened yesterday." "Yes, ma'am," Raymond said flatly, not wanting to discuss the incident. He thought Miss Marcus was going to give him a lecture on fighting, but instead she said, "That Joseph Banker is nothing but trouble. You stay away from him, Raymond. You're too smart to get wrapped up in his drama. And you tell Harlon," she continued, "not to worry 1 minute about what other people say. Folks around here can't even seem to mind their own business. Raymond was surprised. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. "Everything else okay, Raymond?" she asked. "I've noticed your grades have been slipping a little. Are you able to study at night?" Miss Marcus seemed genuinely concerned. Raymond wanted to tell her that he wasn't able to study because he was busy trying not to starve and freeze to death every night. But he remembered the last time a teacher tried to help him and what that had gotten him. "Is there anything I can—" "Everything is great," Raymond said, cutting her off. "We've just been busy at home lately with the holidays coming." Miss Marcus sighed. "Okay, Raymond. Let me know if you need anything at all. All right? Anything at all." Later on in math class, Mr. Brewer didn't mention the events from the day before. In fact, he didn't speak to Raymond at all. They had a quiz at the beginning of class and then a short review. When he was finished with the lesson, Mr. Brewer gave them directions for practice problems and sat down at his desk. Raymond opened his math book and stared down at it. There was a crisp $5 bill lying on the inside cover.